Alright everybody, this is Mr. McKeever again. We're going to talk about the other half of the causes that started World War I. And today we're going to start off with alliances. So if you remember last time we were talking about how militarism really started creating this mentality that every country in Europe had to build the biggest, best army they physically could in order to prepare themselves for some kind of conflict they had anticipated was going to happen, but no one really knew. Well, the alliances are the other facet of that. So everyone in Europe is going to end up starting picking sides as to who they thought was going to be the best match of people for them. So people do start developing alliances across Europe, and some of them are alliances that are very much contradictory to general animosities that have existed in Europe for hundreds of years. The first of which is going to be a triple alliance between Germany, Austria, and Italy. This is a defensive alliance. This is not going to be something where we're talking about these three are planning on attacking any other country in Europe. This is only if one of the nations was going to be attacked, the other two would come to their aid. Now, this is really designed by Germany in order to protect itself from France, who was the only real enemy that Germany had at this point in time. And they thought that this would guarantee that really, there was nothing the French could do if they ever wanted to attack Germany. There were no designs to ever attack other countries around Europe. This was just a protection from France. But when this takes place, people are starting to raise questions. And life was fine for the most part, as long as Bismarck was running Germany, because you had kind of a sense of trust that he really didn't want to start a conflict. And he had professed throughout the last 30 years of European history that that was not what he wanted to do. Since the unification of Germany was complete, all he wanted was peace in Europe and for an opportunity for the German people to grow in prosperity. And people accepted this, particularly the British, who had a direct tie with Germany. It's important to remember that the Germans and the British were actually of the same family at that point in time. The Kaiser's wife was British. The new Kaiser, who's going to be the one who fires Bismarck, his mother is British. So there's this tie, there's this belief that there really isn't going to be a conflict in the near future as long as Bismarck has control of Europe. Well, when he's no longer in control of Europe, everything starts to go out the window really, really quickly. And these alliances start to go out of really just out of no man's land. Just all sorts of things start falling into place for some cataclysmic event to take place. So all of Bismarck's plans and ideas, all of his goals to guarantee that Germany is not going to be dragged into conflict are really thrown out the window. His successor admittedly says, why would anyone ever try to succeed this guy? He has done so much with so little. So when he becomes the successor to Bismarck, he believes that he is incapable of actually doing what Bismarck did. So he's like, all right, I got to come up with my own ideas. And when he does this, everything really starts to turn south very quickly. British are now afraid of Germany, particularly when it comes to Kaiser Wilhelm's desire to create a navy. So to do this, or to address this, they are going to start really reaching out to other countries in Europe in hopes to find friends if there ever was a conflict in Europe. First, he's going to reach out towards the British, or the French, and the British and the French are going to become aligned for the first time ever. This is a country, or a pair of countries, that have hated each other for almost 1,000 years now. Since the 100 Years' War, we have the 30 Years' War, we have conflicts across European history where the British and the French have been at each other's throats. The Napoleonic Wars were even just, 100 years ago. Well, these two nations are going to bury the hatchet out of German fear for the British and German hatred for the French. And they kind of rally behind that, just not really want to deal with the whole German threat on their own. And they create what they call the Entente Cordiale. Well, the British, not willing to just settle with French alliances, will also turn to the Russians. And this is an interesting alliance in and of itself, because the Russians were actually German allies for really the last 40 years. And the alliance between the Germans and the Russians expires, and there's no attempt to renew it by the new German Prime Minister. And when this happens, Russia feels kind of left out, and they're a little embittered by this too, that Germany would just, push off the Russians like they didn't really care. And this is going to leave them right in the arms of the British. And this is really the absolute worst nightmare for the German people, because now you have that two-front war that Bismarck thought was going to be the death of Germany. That's why he never wanted any war to break out. So now we have a new set of alliances in Europe. We have one is called the Triple Alliance. It's going to be Germany, Austria, and Italy. The Germans really have no inherent beefs with anyone other than the French themselves, but even at that point they believed that they were so far beyond what the French could muster that they weren't entirely worried about it. Austria is a little upset about, that whole Eastern European thing that they dealt with the Russians, but really they're just allying with the Germans because they're desperate for any German help and everything. And the Italians are just annoyed with the French, much like the Germans are. The British and the French and the Russians are going to join what they call the Triple Entente. Britain is afraid of German aspirations of dominance. They are a little afraid of this growing German navy. They are very afraid of what happens if this growing German army were ever on the move. The French just adamantly hate the Germans, and the Russians are just upset that they didn't get their treaty removed. So this is going to be an interesting scenario because these two alliances are really going to make this a giant global war. It's called World War I because it involves pretty much everyone across the globe, and it's because these alliances that it becomes that way. Now, there's one other set of alliances that really are important during this time period, and that's an alliance that Russia has. It didn't seem like it was a monumental alliance at the time because the country involved isn't exactly a global powerhouse, but it's going to play a massive role in how things play out, and that is going to be Russia's alliance with Serbia. The two countries share a Slavic background. They have that same, basic culture between the two regions, and this is going to, really ally them together. And Russia is much more closely tied to Serbia than it ever is France or Britain. So if anything were to happen to Serbia, Russia would immediately step in, even if it wasn't in their best interest to do so. So this is going to set up the alliance as the third big cause of World War I, and kind of sets us up for our last one, which is going to be nationalism. Nationalism, as I've told you guys, what seems like 1,000 times now, is the driving force in European history from really the time of Napoleon on. And World War I is the penultimate event that really emphasizes that. When it comes down to it, it's all about Austria-Hungary. We've been leading up to this for months. Austria-Hungary is a hotbed of nationalism that needs to be addressed. And it will be addressed, just not in the way that anyone really anticipated. What we have here is a small little nation called Bosnia-Herzegovina. This is a nation that is not directly controlled in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's actually something that was given to them in the whole Congress of Berlin that Bismarck helped orchestrate. So they don't directly control it, but they kind of oversee what happens in the country. Well, they want to become just immediately free so they can join Serbia. They have a shared culture with them. They have nothing in common with the Austro-Hungarians, and they're really just trying to push away. And considering that it really wasn't a territory of Austria-Hungary, it seems like this should have been a really simple confrontation to deal with. But this is history, and if you guys have ever noticed, as the Charlie Brown cartoon here says, something always bad is going to happen, and that's exactly what happens here. We have an organization of people called the Black Hand, and they are Serbian nationalists who are trying to push away from Austria-Hungary in hopes of creating what they call a Greater Serbia, which is really this entire Balkan region uniting under one crown. And they decide that it's time for them to do something with this whole Austro-Hungarian issue, and what we have is the shot heard round the world. This is a cataclysmic global event. As a Serbian student, a guy by the name of Gavrilo Princip is going to assassinate the Archduke of Austria and his wife as they celebrated their wedding in the city of Sarajevo. They were having a parade down the street. He literally jumped out of the crowd with a gun and shot them at point-blank range. And this is going to change everything. While there was a little animosity before, now there's open animosity between nations. Serbia immediately is kind of like, oops, our bad. I mean, they weren't our people, but like, we feel bad because, yeah, that was pretty bad. Austria is furious, and they want some kind of penance for what happened. And the only thing that they come up with is, we're going to give you an ultimatum. And they knew Serbia would never accept this ultimatum. It was, we're going to carry out an investigation. You're going to kind of give us the ability to do whatever we want in Serbia until we figure everything out. And you're going to apologize to us, this formal declaration that you guys screwed up. And it would have been a massive insult to a relatively young Serbian nation. Austria knew that this was never going to fly. In fact, they were planning it. The only reason they did it is because Germany actually backed them and said, you know what, when you do this, they're going to turn it down, but we'll be there to support you when they do. And everything begins to fall apart. Europe is well aware of what's happening right now. Nationalism is literally ripping apart Austria-Hungary, and it's going to rip apart Europe. This was the shot that causes the beginning of World War I. And it was just a matter of time before it happened. But eventually Austria will declare war on Serbia. Serbia declares it back, and every nation, all these alliances start to call each other out and declare war on each other. And World War I will break out due to the actions of a single human being, but none of that matters if it isn't for these series of 4 different cataclysmically important issues in European history at the time. And if you take out any one of them, we don't really know if this ever really pans out. You know, if you take out the alliances, maybe it's a direct confrontation between Austria and Serbia. It becomes a footnote in history. If you take out the militarism, the 14 million people don't die. Take out nationalism, we don't have the spark. And if you take out imperialism, we don't have the animosity that brings the other ones apart. So it's a great debate as to what actually happens to start World War I. And that's actually a debate I want you guys to continue. So after you've watched both of these videos and you've taken your notes as to what the 4 main causes of World War I are, there's a Moodle forum that I would like you guys to respond to, answering the question, which is the most important cause of World War I? Which of the 4 reasons do you think was the single most influential? Explain why, and then respond to one of your classmates' comments to further the conversation. Who is the true cause of World War I? Why did someone do it, and who's to blame? Alright, thanks guys. You have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys after spring break.